Hello, and welcome to the first lecture of Psych 144. So, just to let you guys know, I'm going to be recording all of my lectures on the PowerPoints that I provide you guys, so you guys have not only the visual of being able to look over the PowerPoints at your own leisure, but also being able to hear me talk about it, so it kind of fills in any blanks that could arise from just reading them. So I hope that you guys use these wisely. I hope that these are beneficial to you. And without much further ado, let's get started. So um, here we go. Lesson 1, the science of psychology. Yes, indeed, it is a science. Um, Actually, psychology uses the scientific method to actually draw conclusions, to make our claims about human behavior and mental processes. It's not all like, oh, well, my friend says this about stuff and that's how it is. It's not they say kind of thing in psychology. It's a lot of scientific rigor that's involved. Part of what makes psychology a science is that it uses systematic empiricism, or the scientific method. There's a clear process of steps that is involved in determining things in psychology and learning stuff in psychology. We use the scientific method in every single aspect, as long as it's actual psychology. Another thing is that it asks empirical questions. So these questions can be tested, and results can be obtained using the scientific method. Asking empirical questions is essentially asking a question that we can test. It's not like, oh, insert fake ass question here, where it's like, oh, I wonder if, I can't think of any BS non-empirical questions, but essentially, an empirical question is something that can be broken down and measured and thus tested using the scientific method. Creating public knowledge. This is where we publish our findings. So by using the scientific method, asking empirical questions, a lot of researchers will write articles and have them submitted to journals to be peer reviewed and then obtained by the journal and published. You guys will be looking up peer-reviewed articles in lab this week. So part of that is not only to show like, hey, I did this, and when you submit things to a journal, part of their review process is that you follow the scientific method. You're not putting any people in unnecessary danger. You're not fabricating data. You're following the scientific method in terms of your study that you've conducted. It's legit. It's gonna produce results that are somewhat significant, hopefully. And it's just, it's not BS. It's not pseudoscience. That's part of the reason, part of the review process for journals is that they make sure that you're, adhering to the scientific method, that your results that you obtain can actually be applied to the field of psychology, and not just in a, oh yeah, this thing happened, but in a like, hey, this thing happened and I'm able to test it. You can test it and check me. You can fact check me if you want. This can be replicated, what I've done. So that's a big part of psychology and science as a whole, that publication of our findings, it's not only there to share knowledge with other people, but it's also to like say, hey, in 10 years time, this research that I've conducted today could be absolutely null and void because stuff is changing. Maybe the field is changing, maybe just society as a whole has changed. I don't know. But either way, the publication aspect is there so that we can kind of review ourselves. So a lot of times people confuse psychology with different examples of pseudoscience. And I think that's why a lot of times psychology gets a bad rap as not being a science, even though it totally is. So with pseudoscience, it's pretty much like on the surface, it looks legit. It's like, ooh, oh, the star formations are aligning with my, with my sign as a Libra, and I know that like I'm gonna have a good day today, or like whatever. It could seem scientific, but truth of the matter is, if to make it pseudoscience, it does not follow the scientific method to make its claims. Now, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people feel like psychology does this, but that's what you see in a lot of pop psychology, a lot of stuff that you see in magazines or just BS that doesn't follow the scientific method, but is popularized to be considered psychology. That's where that comes from. So pseudoscience, again, it doesn't use the scientific method. It could not use systematic empiricism, which again is using the scientific method. It may not ask empirical questions, and it might not actually keep its findings or how they got these conclusions public knowledge. So it's not, there's no peer-reviewed journals for astrology. There's just, it's there, deal with it. So some common examples of pseudoscience. Let me know if this sounds familiar. So a festive social event could either start or consolidate a love relationship, which could last for a long time. New and interesting people could come into your life, bringing stimulating conversation and useful information. Someone you haven't seen for a while could also appear on the scene, making for a joyful reunion. A project you've been working on, either job-related or personal, can finally be completed. Enjoy your day. So crap like that, that's what you're going to see in horoscopes. So this is known as the Barnum effect, where these vague statements can provide many different meanings to many different people. So you can read this, and since it's just vague enough, you can say like, oh yeah, a festive social event. Well, oh, well, I went to my cousin's the other day and there was more than one person there. Wow. That was a festive social event because then we played Cards Against Humanity. Oh my God, it's going to consolidate a love relationship. My cousin was talking about how he was on Tinder and he told me that, like, I don't know, whatever. But the Barnum effect is essentially kind of playing into that, be vague and it applies to everyone. So it seems like you're doing something. So I don't have any problem with horoscopes. I mean, I'll check my own sometimes just for shits and giggles, but I'd never consider it as a science. So if you're like big into horoscopes or astrology, I'm not trying to knock you down a peg, but essentially I want you to know that that is not science. That's not science. It's more of a pseudoscience. Palm reading and fortune telling are the same. Fun story. About 10 years ago, oh my God, it was like 10 years ago now, my Lord. So 10 years ago, I had a friend and we were in college and we were bored and we were just like, let's go get our palms read, dude. And it's like, hell yeah, let's freaking go. Cause I mean, you know, let's just see what this person has to say about our lives. I always find that kind of interesting. And so we went to get our palms read and we go to, well, first we go to the office, the palm reading office, you know, just off the highway, legit. And it's closed. So we call the number that's on the door and she said, the woman answers, the palm reader answers, you know, the medium answers. And she's like, oh, you know, come to my home office, or like, you know, I'm open, but just come to my home office. And we're like, okay. And at this point, it's like, all right, we got to see what's going on. We have to follow this up. So we travel to her house and we knock on the door and she's like, oh, yes, come in, come in. And I was like, okay. So we sit in her living room, and just off her living room is her dining room where, you know, the magic's about to happen. And she's setting up a little, like, I don't even remember. Actually, she might have just set up in terms of maybe put down a tablecloth that had like funky print on it. I don't remember exactly. It was 10 years ago. But what I do remember is sitting in her living room and there was Family Guy playing as her, like, I'm assuming her like 4 or 5-year-old son just runs in and out of that room without any clothes on. Well, he had like a diaper and pants on, I think, but he's just running around half naked. And it's like, ah, yes. The ambiance is complete. So we're sitting there, and so she calls me up first, I think, and she's telling me like, oh, it was 2010. And she's like, oh, yes, you know, I see lots of travel in your future. You're going to travel great places. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. All taking this with a grain of salt. And she's like, you are going to find love. There's going to be 2 people interested in you this year. Choose wisely, or like some crap. And I mean, okay, needless to say, I don't think I traveled much other than maybe like up and down California. No like whirlwind crazy traveling adventure where I'm backpacking across Costa Rica or what have you. Two, finding love, that didn't happen. I mean, again, this is just all stuff that they use these really vague statements. They look at me and my friend coming in, and we're young women, new or relatively, new college students. And I think that palm reader just kind of thought, oh, well, they want to travel, they're going to kind of fall into that traveling realm, because a lot of young people are like, let's friggin' go, let's get out of this hellhole. Or just, you're young and have the energy to do so. Or like, oh, love's always a big one because everyone wants to fall in love, or like whatever. So yeah, so palm readers definitely read into these vague statements that can provide what you want to hear, essentially, in the terms of palm reading. So that's pseudoscience, and I just kind of look back at that and think that's a little, I didn't find love that year. I found it much later. But anyway, so more examples of pseudopsychology is phrenology, which is actually the study of how the shape or structure of a person's skull, their head, the part that contains their brain, determines personality and mental capacity. So if you have a big head, you might be considered smart, or if you have a larger protruding forehead, you could be arrogant or something like that. But it's not really testable. It's not really a good way to determine personality, because, as we will discuss many times in this class, correlation does not imply causation. And you can't just take something as arbitrary as what someone's skull shape is and determine their personality and mental capacities from it. So phrenology, while it was popular in early years of the field, it has since been debunked, and we don't really talk about it anymore, other than we talk about it, but to say how it's a pseudoscience and how we don't do it. So so with scientific claims, they have to be falsifiable, which means that you have to be able to conduct research and do it again and replicate that research to say, hey, with the findings that you had, they didn't apply to this time. You have to be able to be proven wrong, essentially. And so if you're trying to talk to some psychic or some like medium of some sort, and they're saying, tell me the future. Oh, I can't right now. The moon is Mercury's in retrograde right now, and it's just it's not a good time for my readings. Okay, let's say Mercury gets out of retrograde or whatever, I don't know, the full moon is out and it's good fortune telling weather. Oh, well, oh, the spirits, oh, I'm not feeling it. It's hard to prove someone wrong. It's hard to prove like, oh, that the fortunes that you're coming up with are wrong, or it's hard to prove fortune telling is crap. When it doesn't even really when it only appears at certain times. So if it can't be replicated, if it's like, oh, I've had a reading yesterday, but I can't do another one today, it's not right, that the circumstances are all wrong, that's not falsifiable, because essentially it's like, oh, so you're basically a crock of shit. No, it's just that the spirits are with me today. It's like, okay, cool, thanks, real beneficial, Madam Pomfrey. But anywho, so why does all of this matter? So the thing about it is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people feel like, or a lot of the people that don't know enough about psychology kind of assume that psychology is all about just feelings and, the self-help book in Barnes and Noble, and that is what psychology is. It's about like, typically people think of psychology and they'll either ask you like, oh, well, it's either, oh, you want to be a therapist or a counselor of some sort, which is a part of psychology, but it is only a small fraction of what psychology is as a whole. Or they'll ask the annoying question of like, oh, you're a psych major? Oh, so what am I thinking? It's like, oh, God. I know that when I was a psych student, I got that a lot. And it's just like, shut up, dude. Like, that's such a Barnum effect that you're asking about right now for me to tell you what you're thinking. I can tell you what I'm thinking you're a friggin' jackass, but that's just my thoughts. So you need to understand, just us as psych majors, going into the field of psychology, be that you want to go the therapeutic route, or you want to go the more research-oriented route, or you want to go anywhere in between, you need to realize that psychology, real psychology, how business is actually conducted in the field, and pseudoscience are two completely different things. And this class will help you kind of demonstrate that. This class, we're going to use the scientific method. So we're going to use that systematic empiricism and ask empirical questions, questions that we can actually demonstrate through measuring our variables and conducting research in whatever capacity and finding results that, you know, we can conclude information from. So here is, let me see if I can move my face. Cool. So here is the scientific research in psychology, the scientific method in action. So we have informal observations or practical problems. So a lot of times this section here, to come up with a research question, it's not necessarily something you have hardwired in your brain of like, ooh, I wonder if such and such a thing. A lot of times our research questions kind of come to us through informal observations of like watching people on the street and thinking like, wow, that dude is really taking over the conversation. You know, I wonder if, you know, I wonder who speaks more in a day, who speaks more words in a day? Is it men or women? And there's stereotypes that women talk a lot, but you know, using some systematic empiricism, I can perhaps show, I can get data that actually shows that men speak more in a day, in a given day, than women do, or what have you. It could be, you know, informal observations. You could be taking a shower one day and, you know, your mind wanders in the shower if you're not singing Skip to My Lou, because, you know, that's a bop. But you could just kind of have your mind wander and just be like, huh, I wonder, or, you know, whatever. So the formation of research questions don't necessarily have to follow the scientific method. It's more so it kind of comes to your head in whatever way, shape, or form. And then you form a research question. So do men speak more in a day than women, or do men and women speak the same amount of words in a day, or what have you? So you have your research question, and then you go to the research literature. You start looking up peer-reviewed articles to kind of see what other researchers have found on these topics. So with reading enough research in that field, in that particular branch of psychology that you're diving into, then you can kind of start forming an empirical study. You can think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to give men and women a recording device of some sort. They'll keep it on them throughout the day. And, you know, I'll maybe study them for like a 2-week period, 14 days. And I will kind of code and see how often, how many words on average men and women speak in a day. So then you have your study, you give, you know, 50 men, 50 women a little recording device, and you found this through research literature. You know, maybe other researchers have also done something like this, or you're inspired by things they've done in the literature and you do this, or what have you. You also see some of the theories that are involved, some of the different theories that in this field of psychology, it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe men, according to a certain part of their brain, talk less or talk more, or just not even necessarily a man-woman thing, but just, oh, you know, we have certain parts of our brain that kind of inhibit or that are in charge of speaking. So the Broca's area of speech or Wernicke's area of speech. And, oh, maybe in certain people where these areas are larger or smaller, that will kind of influence them to speak more. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a man-woman thing, but more so just the biological makeup of how our brains are structured. I don't know. I just kind of wung that one. I don't think that's in the literature, but but you get the idea. So you get this information from the research literature. You take all of this and apply it to an empirical study, which you can actually measure. So 50 men, 50 women have a little recording device. After 14 days, we're going to collect these devices and then comb through them, counting all the words that they say in one day and average that over the 14 days for each individual person. And then for each individual man, I'm going to average it with all 49 of the other men that I have, and same with the women. And then we're going to have data that we can actually analyze. So from here, all right, we have our data. We have the average number of words spoken in a day by all the men and the average words spoken in a day by all the women. Now we can conduct an independent samples t-test, which we'll get into later in the semester. If it rings a bell from statistics, cool, good on you. If not, we'll get there. But you conduct an independent samples t-test and you see, oh, well, actually there is no difference. Or, oh, I do have statistical significance. There is, in fact, a substantial difference. And, oh, men speak more words in a day. Or, oh, women speak more words in a day, whatever. But then once you've analyzed the data, then you make conclusions. So keep in mind that we had 50 men and 50 women in this. Now, obviously, there is a hell of a lot more than 50 men and women in the world. Yeah, probably just a smidge more than that. So these conclusions that we're making, we're generalizing this information we got from our sample of 100 total people. We're generalizing that to the entire population, or whatever the population is in question. So we just kind of talked about, oh, do men speak more than women? So our population is just men and women in general. Now, if we were going to look into like, oh, do college students speak more than, I don't know, high school students or something like that, our populations have changed. Suddenly we're looking at college students and high school students, or again, what have you. And so when we have these samples of 100 people, 200 people, 1,000 people, whatever your sample size is, chances are you're going to be generalizing the findings that you've made from your study, from your data analysis, and generalizing that to the population that you're looking at. And that is the conclusion that you make. And that feeds back into the literature. Let's say that this is published, peer reviewed, you publish it, and it's in the next journal. Suddenly now your research that you just conducted about, oh, do men or women talk more? Suddenly that is contributing to the research literature in this topic. So you have since contributed to the practical knowledge, you've since contributed to the shared knowledge in psychology, and it's just in this pool of, let's do it all over again. So when it comes to doing the research in psychology, who is actually doing it? You know, are there like little research minions out there, or are these people that are like locked in their offices smoking cigars and cigarettes and wondering, oh God, when am I going to find a significant value or whatever? So people that are conducting research are oftentimes people with graduate degrees. So that would be a PhD, a doctorate, or a master's degree. They also have the help of research assistants. Oftentimes these are undergraduate students. So in this case, we're talking about more the university realm. So people that have PhDs, a lot of professors on campus at Fresno State, they have research teams, and they need help. You know, they need undergraduate students oftentimes to come join the team, and they will help the professor engage in research. Master's students or grad students are also on research teams, and oftentimes the undergrads will help the master's students with kind of getting the data for their thesis. Either way, these undergrad students are getting research experience. So if you're interested in any sort of graduate program in psychology, it doesn't necessarily have to be a research focused one too. You can be interested in counseling or family therapy. My suggestion is to always at least join a research team, because it always looks good to have research on your CV or your curriculum vitae, basically your academic resume. But it always looks good to have research experience on a resume. Again, grades can only get you so far. Your GRE scores or whatever standardized test you have to take to apply to whatever program you're interested in, those good scores are all well and good. But if you have research experience or some sort of actual hands-on, hey, you know, I want to do research in psychology, you know, my grades, maybe I don't have a perfect 4.0, but I have 3 years of research experience under Dr. So-and-so, and here's what we looked into. We looked into sample size bias. We looked into, you know, the confirmation bias. We looked into God, I can't think of any of the stuff I did in undergrad now. I'm like blanking. But essentially, instead of just saying, oh, I got good grades and look, I got really good GRE scores, you're also saying, I presented research at the Western Psychological Association conference in 2000 such and such a year, and I assisted with gathering data and analyzing data or something like that. So you show that you're walking the walk, essentially. So again, research is really commonly done in university settings. Government agencies will also provide research, also do research. Nonprofit and community-based organizations. When I was in grad school, I was an intern for RICV, it still exists. Resources for Independence in Central Valley. Oh yeah, Resources of Independence for Central Valley. Yeah, and what they did was they were providing independence for people that had disabilities. And so as a grad student, I worked there, and I created a survey, and I helped to actually construct help to put together a class that taught people with disabilities Robert's Rules of Order and other things that are necessary for being a part of a board meeting or being part of a member of the board of directors. And this was providing people with disability, although it wasn't just people with disabilities who could apply and like get into this class, but essentially it was providing more agency, more knowledge for people to be able to be in these board meetings when, not a lot of representation is there for people with disabilities. So this was providing them some training in which can help get them there. Yeah. So also another place is the private sector. So all of these different things do research in psychology. So a lot of times people think that all you can do in psychology is therapy or teach, but that is not the case. There are a lot of organizations that do research, and they need people that know how to do that. So by being in this class, this is just your first step in understanding how do we do research in psychology. But if you really like it, or if you move forward on in your academic career and you realize, I'm not really interested in this anymore, I'm more so steering towards, I want to work in maybe the private sector, or I'd love to work with a community-based organization or whatever, just know that your degree in psychology can still do you favors in that realm. So I mentioned how research questions in psychology can be born kind of organically, where it can just spring up ideas in your head, from as simple as like watching people on the street, although don't be creepy about it, or taking a shower and suddenly you have those shower thoughts or whatever. But another thing is to read up on on just some psychological things out there. So here are some blogs that have different research topics on them. I urge you guys to kind of look through them and, read a couple that are interesting to you. They don't have to be, child psych, psych blog, or APS research topics. They don't have to necessarily be, you can just get ideas from these. These aren't since they're blogs, they are not necessarily always peer reviewed. So I wouldn't use these. In fact, you shouldn't use these for your papers that you guys are going to be writing. But again, this is that informal kind of getting ideas sort of thing. That's the informal process of research methods, or just coming up and formulating a research question, looking through here and just kind of getting ideas brewing in your head. So I urge you guys to look over that. And that is what I have for you today. Again, you can look at that. You can find the links in the PowerPoint that I've posted, so you guys can actually, click those, as opposed to like, oh, I can't click a video and it pauses it. Although you guys, I'm sure you're aware of this. But I will see you again when I start when I start discussing APA style. Woo! So I'll see you guys then. I hope you have a good day. Like and subscribe.